Hello again, this is Professor Lucien, bringing you Lecture 11 for Safety 380, Introduction to Occupational Safety and Health. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about OSHA record keeping, which incidentally is one of my areas of expertise and also the basis for some of the research I'm working on. And so, in addition to the showing you some things about the OSHA website, and you're going to need to, I'll just advance it so you can see, you also need to take a look at Chapter 11 in the Administration and Programs textbook. I'm going to provide you with a chapter I just submitted that should be published in the Safety Professionals Handbook this coming summer. It's not required because it's advanced. It assumes that the reader already has some experience with OSHA record keeping because I actually go beyond it. So if you're interested, if you're going into safety or if you're going to be in HR and have to work with keeping injury and illness records, you may want to take a look at it. Otherwise, everything else is, based on last week. I introduced you to the OSHA website. I want you to start going to it. It's going to be a requirement for this course. And so I'm going to show you different screenshots of the OSHA website, things I want you to go to look up, especially if you're going to have to access it, after this course or after you graduate. And for the rest of the semester, I'm going to be sprinkling those types of requirements for you to go and look things up. I'm also going to talk a little bit about incidence rates that will carry over into the next lecture on the Bureau of Labor Statistics because they're kind of intertwined. But I decided to break them both out. So I'll talk about that as well. I've got issues. Here's a screenshot of the link to the OSHA record keeping page. And there's some interesting insight right here. So there's a direct link to 29 CFR 1904. That's the record keeping standard. There's an enforcement memorandum. Interesting, I'm not going to go into it with you. At the top, it talks about the different forms, the 301, the 300 log, and the 300A, which is the annual summary. It addresses a little bit about the exemptions, and actually on the homework, I'm going to have you define that. Talks about what's recordable, define first aid. That's in my chapter. You can also look that up. It's interesting because basically anything beyond first aid is essentially what you could pick up in a few hours in a class. Beyond first aid is when things become recordable, and that's when you have to actually do a procedure or use something that requires more training or education, I guess. But they've got a list, and the list even surprises me. So like a soft splint, one that's flexible, is not recordable. One that has a rigid hold-in-place element is recordable. If you use saline to get something out of the eye, that's first aid, not recordable. If it requires like a technique that a physician knows or a chemical that you'd have to purchase to use, then it is recordable. So I don't like that gray area. I think if someone is experienced harm or potential harm at the workplace, it should be reported, investigated, and recorded. Because how else are we supposed to improve something if we don't look into it? All right, get off the soapbox. You can take a look at the record-keeping forms here. The homework requires you to do that. It'll be in the quiz too. Full record-keeping regulation. Something that's, I wouldn't say new, because it's several years old, is that certain companies have to upload their annual summaries or their 300-day data. And that's been an interesting discussion over the last several years. On the OSHA website, you can now access the previous 3 or 4 years of data, which I'm doing for this research I'm working on. It's kind of interesting. And then they had a data initiative years ago from like 2002 to 2011. I've already downloaded and analyzed that. I've been presenting that at conferences. Haven't written it up yet. And then finally, if an employee experiences an injury that results in hospitalization, that means they were admitted for treatment. Not admitted for observation, admitted for treatment, or there's an amputation, or there's a loss of eye, you're required as an employer to contact OSHA within 24 hours. If a worker dies, you're required to contact OSHA within 8 hours. Yes, they're probably going to send someone out right away. That's the requirement. All right. Oh, sorry, went too far. There we go. Here's the purpose. Purpose is just so if a worker experiences an injury, the company's looking into it, because the whole idea of practicing safety and health is to try and prevent injuries and illnesses. But when they occur, there should be a response. And that response is attempting to find out what led to it, why it occurred, and then coming up with some sort of corrective action to prevent it from rehappening or happening again. Rehappening doesn't sound like a word. And so there are requirements under the OSHA record keeping standard. However, if you read my chapter, I basically address how it has many shortcomings, that we should be doing much more than just what the standard calls for. Here's the typology of injury case. You see it's stated a nursing aide sprains her back from overexertion while lifting a patient. It's got the nature, body part, event or exposure, and the source of injury or illness. And that's information that's collected in the 301, put onto the 300 log. It doesn't make it to the annual summary because that's just purely the total numbers. But when we go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and look at their Survey of Occupational Injury and Illness, you'll see this breakdown. They provide that kind of information, a breakdown by industry. There are exemptions, and this is the most basic exemption. I'm going to want you to identify the additional layers of exemptions for the in the homework. And that is, if your company had 10 or fewer employees all year long, you are exempt from actually keeping the records. You're not exempt from calling, and depending on what kind of industry you're in, you may not be exempt from uploading, which means you'd have to keep it anyway. So 11 or more at any time. You have to be 10 or less. That's sort of a rule of thumb, but if anybody ever asks me, I tell them keep the records anyway. Just it's a good initial practice if you want to improve safety, to have employees report and feel comfortable to report things, have it investigated, and try to resolve it so it doesn't happen again. That's how I feel. This is a decision tree that I created for my chapter. I think it contains more than what I could find online. And so the two questions on the screen here are, is it recordable and is it reportable when you have to contact OSHA? And you can kind of follow the tree here. I show, whether it was work-related or it was a new case that dictates whether it gets recorded, or you augment an earlier case. Did the employee die? Was the doctor ordered to order the injured worker to stay home to recover? Did they order physical restrictions or limitations? Did they provide treatment beyond first aid? Did the worker lose consciousness, or were they diagnosed with hearing loss? All those things make it recordable. If it doesn't meet that qualification, basically if they only receive first aid or less for treatment, then it's not recordable. But then I also put on the left there, if a death occurred, contact OSHA within 8 hours. Hospitalization, loss of eye, or amputation, contact within 24. And there are ample links and opportunities to find how to contact OSHA. You can submit an email. There's an 800 number you can call. I recommend you find your local area OSHA office and contact them directly, because that's also available. You guys actually had to look that up for the last homework. There are 3 primary forms to OSHA record keeping, and I've stated them before. They're on the screen here, and I've actually given you the citation. The 301 is the Incident and Illness Incident Report. We sometimes call that the first report of injury. That has to be completed. As long as you, and some employers, what they do is they combined their OSHA 301 with the state-required workers' compensation first report of injury, and they have a form that at least addresses all the fields at minimum. Okay. Once that's completed, there's a case number assigned in the 301 that you put into the 300. We typically just call that the 300 log. It's the form 300. It's called the log of work-related injury and illness. Each column has importance. It's like it's a variable of an accident case. And that's something that allows us then to analyze a group of cases or cases over time. And so it's the most commonly discussed form for record keeping. At the end of every calendar year, each company who is required to keep the records, they add up all the columns, at least the columns that have numbers, and they enter it into the 300A. Form 300A is the summary of work-related injury and illness. And some executive from the company is required to sign it, actually, that they've looked at it. And then it has to be posted somewhere in the workplace, somewhere where all the workers can see it, a break room, a safety board, or other announcement board. And compliance officers look for that. February 1st through April 30th. If it's not there, that's a citation. Here's the 300 form up close. People don't say a lot of things about this, but if you read my chapter, you'll see that I break it down and compare it to the 300 and compare both of those to an effective root cause analysis approach versus just a what happened. It's better to know why it happened so you can correct it. And here's the 300. I've got issues with this as well. Specifically, column F, there's too much information jammed into one variable. It should actually be split out into 3 or more. And there's nothing here that attempts to track the follow-up or what was done. And I think that's a missed opportunity by OSHA. And here's the summary that gets posted. Pretty straightforward. Something that's somewhat new is the 300A, or the electronic submission of the 300A. When they initially announced that they were going to require companies or certain companies to upload their data, they were going to have them upload the 301, the 300, and the 300A. And right away I thought, there's no way they're going to be able to handle that volume of data to be uploaded, and they wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. Not a year later, they got rid of the 300 and the log and the 301 stuff. Now companies just upload the 300A. And that's something that I'm tapping into to do my research. Just looking at 2019 calendar year 300A data, a lot of errors in the entry. I went in, I did sort of a broad scope descriptive analysis, and it just didn't look right. So now I got to go in and find a methodology that allows me to synthesize. There's almost 300,000 entries on Excel. That's a lot, and Excel tends to bog down when it's that loaded. And so I got to find a way to clean it up before I start doing my analysis. So you can actually, this is where companies go in, they create an account, they sign in, and there are instructions on how to upload their 300A. That's due by March 2nd. That's important. It used to be July. Now it's March 2nd. Every March 2nd, they got to get that stuff in. Here is a link to what OSHA posts. So they have 2016 through 2019's 300A. So this all started in 2016. I started looking at 2019. I'll work my way back so I can trend it. And then I can also then go back and compare it to the data I got from the older data initiative. So I downloaded the, I think it's a 2002 through 2011. I didn't look at the 96 through 2001 because a lot changed in how data is kept and stored after 2002. OSHA transitioned from the 200 log and the 200 series to the 300 series. So it's difficult to compare those two. It wouldn't be, I don't know how much value I would get by going all the way back to the 96 to 2001 data initiative. Can you tell? I love doing this stuff. I love working with data, and I've really gotten my fingers into it. I'm so glad that they provide it so you can download it. Yeah. And then, okay, so what do we do with this data other than posting it or calling, things like that, or uploading it? We calculate incidence rates. Out in the world, a lot of people don't understand the term incidence rate. And so I've got it on the screen here. I want you to read about it. This is part of the OSHA record-keeping workbook that I posted for you. It's basically, there are different versions of the incidence rate. There's total case, which is all recordables. There's DART, which stands for Days Away Restricted Transfer. So those are the lost time OSHA recordable cases. And then sometimes we do the lost work day. So that's just when the doctor says, you must stay home and recover. And they do that. One thing with counting the number of days, either lost, so either they have to stay home, which is days away, or restricted transfer, which a doctor says, here's a physical limitation for work for a while, is that you don't include the day of the incident. So if I got hurt on a Friday and I go to the doctor and the doctor says, or writes in their script, just relax this weekend. You shouldn't do anything this weekend, but you can go back on Monday. That would be lost time because they go by calendar day. You don't include the Friday. You would count Saturday and Sunday. So it'd be 2 days lost, and then I go back on Monday. Would they ever do that? Probably not. But that's just an example. So it's calendar days, and it doesn't include. So even though I didn't have a shift over the weekend, if the doctor diagnoses you should do nothing over the next 2 days, you count those as lost days. Or if the doctor says, you should lift over 5 pounds with your right arm. Maybe that's what I injured for the next 2 days or 3 days. You would count the weekend even though you're not scheduled. That's just OSHA trying to simplify it. Now back to this. So we put the number of cases times by 200,000 divided by hours worked, and that gives you a rate. So the number of injury cases per 100 full-time equivalency workers. The reason why we use the term FTE is because some businesses have part-time workers. So it's the equivalent of a 40-hour a week worker. That's how they do that. So that's the unit of measure, the unit of comparison. And so it allows you to compare your company over time, even if the number of employees change. The rate is sort of the number of exposures from a work hour versus the number of recordable cases. The Bureau of Labor Statistics also publishes annual data, but they publish it from an industry basis. And we believe that we can compare our company data to our industry peers based on the North American Industrial Classification System, or NAICS code. Every company has a 6-digit NAICS code. And but the problem is, I believe that what the Bureau is doing, I'm going to cover this next lecture, I'm sorry I got off on this tangent, that they add up everything and then they divide it by everything. That's not like taking each individual company and adding that up and averaging it. You get similar numbers, but you don't understand it the same way. So that's why I'm doing my research right now, is I'm trying to figure out what's a better way to express NAICS code incidence rates. Just instead of just saying the average, maybe report the mode median, the 95% confidence interval or something. That would be a better way to do it, because the way they're doing it now, there's an assumption of normality, the bell curve, but I don't think we have that in injury data. And I'll get into that later or in a different course. I should shut up. Here's my initial results from the 2002 to 2011 analysis. And here is the distribution. These distributions do not meet the basic assumption of normality. In essence, they're asymptotic. You can see that the median and averages are different. And you can see that the dominant class is 0. And I don't think that's included or considered when you talk about average from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Here are the different classifications of incidence rate that I mentioned. We don't always calculate the other recordable incidence rate. And I also gave you the 300 log columns here matched up. So total case is H, I, and J. Days away restricted transfer, or DART, is just H and I. The other recordable is just J. And that's, if you take 43 with me, we do this a lot. We do a lot of calculations. We're actually doing them right now. I have issues with incidence rates. I mean, not only does underreporting, which I think the standard kind of enforces or promotes, but also, some employees are afraid to report things due to issues at work. Some companies try to keep things off the log so they look better. That's under recording and reporting, so it's going to be a low number. The one that I'm concerned about is that when you do a company-wide incidence rate, it doesn't have the detail, or it doesn't account for certain job titles or departments that have really high injuries. So if you were to focus, because it gets diluted when you add in everything together. I think it'd be better to have like this picture you have here, and this is something that I did when I worked at the state. I calculated incidence rates by job title. And here you can see, company-wide, they're a 5.8. Yay, we're doing a great job. But if you look at individual job titles, certain jobs are getting throttled. And that gets washed out when you just calculate incidence rates and say, this is who we are. This is how our program's performing. And then I show some examples here. The total case, it means 3 out of 100 workers. The DART, 5 out of 100 workers for the type of cases you're investigating. I talked a lot longer than I had thought I was going to. I could go on a lot more. So there's some key things I want you to look at by going to the OSHA website. I invite you to take a look at my chapter. Again, it's a springboard from what's covered in the chapter you're going to read for the course. But I think all in all, if you in your career are going to have to keep records, do investigation analyses, and use the data to track the performance of the safety program, it would be good if you would kind of follow some of my tips. But if you're interested, I will be posting updated information on my YouTube channel because, again, this is an area I'm really interested in, and it's something that I want to focus on over the next several years. So check out the study sheet. It'll help prepare you for the quiz, and the assignment for the week will have you actually go and answer a few questions.